Hello and welcome back to episode 10 of the ID Boxing Podcast with me, your host, Rob Tebber. As always, just like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. It's just us this week, myself and Mr. Andy Clark. We're free from the shackles of Barry Jones. We've split from him. The throuple is now a good old-fashioned couple.
Yeah, exactly. Traditional.
We are here, of course, to talk about Canelo Alvarez versus John Ryder. Feels like it's kind of crept up on us, I think. Most big fights do in the boxing calendar. Andy, I know we've spoken about it several times in the past, but now it's kind of here and we're a matter of days away from it. Quite looking forward to the spectacle, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's in Mexico, and you don't get to see too many fights like this, of this size anyway, in that environment. And I think it will be really different for exactly that reason. I'm not going to get to go myself. I think you might be. I'm very, very jealous, because going to different countries to cover boxing is an absolute joy, because fight week's just different. The whole vibe's different. The place is literally different. The way people live their lives is different. And it's just so interesting to experience it all. And on a kind of personal level with it, I've covered John Ryder for a long time. I did quite a few of his early fights. I remember covering him on the Kell Brook Matthew Hatton card around that time from about 2011 onwards. And I've just always really liked him as a person. I wouldn't claim to know him really well, but he seems like a decent guy, and everybody has always said exactly that whenever you talk about John. And he's had some setbacks in his career, a couple of which I struggled to see him coming back from. I remember commentating on his split decision loss to Rocky Fielding for a British title. I think that was his third attempt at a British title. And after that, I really struggled to see where he would go, to be honest. And to see him regenerate in the way that he has and get this fight, you would not have predicted that back in 2017 after he lost to Fielding. And this is as big as it gets. This is the biggest, outside of the heavyweight division, this is the biggest fight in world boxing, and he's going to make a pile of money from it, whatever happens. And I'm just really pleased for him on that score, because you work and you work and you work, and sometimes you might break even in terms of getting out what you feel you need to for what you've put in. And he's worked and worked and worked. And yes, he's had some good nights and some good paydays, I'd imagine. Callum Smith, Jacobs, some others. But Callum Smith, he could have got that decision and he didn't. And if he had, his life would have been different, because then you're a defending champion and that's where the money comes. So it is a bit of a fairy tale for John. But I don't think he'll shrink from it. He is a good fighter. He's not as good as Canelo. It'd be pointless for me to sit here and say that he is. But he's seasoned, he's tough, and he's got some skills. And I think he will give us a good account of himself.
He's had kind of a few near misses in the last few years. I know there was a period of time right at the start of the pandemic where he was linked to David Morrell for the WBA regular. Of course, a very hard fight for nowhere near what he's going to be making to box Canelo Alvarez. And you mentioned about the Callum Smith fight, and Callum Smith after that went and boxed Canelo. Would have made a lot of money there. I'm sure John Ryder was probably watching from home like the rest of us and really wishing or wondering what could have been.
That's it. And those are the things you don't see, isn't it? You know, where they've been in their headspace and how many times they've kind of thought to themselves, is this really worth it anymore? I know earlier in his career, he'd taken his licenses to work security, and he was pretty close to doing it at one point, because he couldn't, as I say, he couldn't really see where he was going to go. He's got a young family and all that kind of thing, responsibilities, and he wasn't sure if he was going to ultimately get out of boxing what he felt he needed to justify the effort and the time and the sacrifices for him and everybody around him. It's the same for all of them, isn't it? And now, yeah, from some dark days, I'm sure, where you just, you do, you look and you just think, I should have got that decision. If I got that decision, I'll be fighting Canelo and I'll be making wildly varying reports, but I mean, it's going to be 7 figures, you'd think. You know, that's loads of money. If you're sensible, that sorts you out for the rest of your life. So yeah, exactly. It's a very uncertain profession they're in for all sorts of reasons, and to see someone hit the jackpot is great.
It certainly is. And, I think we're kind of full disclosure. I think we're both picking Canelo Alvarez to win. He's rightfully...
You have to. How could you not?
Yeah, he's rightfully a massive favourite. But if there's ever a good time to box Canelo Alvarez, I don't think he set the world alight in the Gennady Golovkin trilogy bout, which we'll kind of come on to and speak about later. He's on the back of hand surgery as well. He's not kind of... You'd think probably at his optimum physical condition, even if it's healed well, there'll always be, even for somebody as experienced as Canelo, there'll always be... Well, whether he has any doubts anymore, probably not, but there'll always be that kind of lingering concern about the hand. And for John Ryder, he's kind of, he'll be fully expecting to win. I mean, fighters, as we know, are very kind of different people to certainly me and you. He'll be going out there and thinking that, I'll go there, I'll put it on him, I'll do this, I'll do that. Almost broke the chair. But, there's no pressure on him. And that's not to say that, people are writing him off out of hand. I think everybody rightfully has Canelo Alvarez as the favourite, but he does go out there with kind of no pressure on his shoulders, and any result is going to be one of the biggest results in the history of certainly British boxing.
Yeah, it absolutely would be. I mean, he'll put plenty of pressure on himself because that's the way you have to do it. But like you say, the weight of expectation isn't there. He will be in demand during fight week, but nothing to the same extent that his opponent will be. And it's always worth looking at these kinds of factors before the event, because it's really easy when you get a massive upset to look at it after the event and think, actually, maybe we should have picked up on that or this. But with Canelo, he's had a lot of fights. He's been doing this a really long time. He turned pro at 15, and he's not that old, but in terms of how long he's been doing it, he's been doing it a really long time. You could say that he's late 30s rather than early 30s, because most people say they turn over when they're 21, not when they're 15. And he's had loads of top-level fights. He's had loads of camps. He did have a disappointing result, obviously, against Bivol. As you said, he has had the hand surgery. Maybe boxing in Mexico might be a distraction because he hasn't boxed there for a long time. I don't think he's ever boxed there with the full now Canelo megastar fanfare.
No, he hasn't.
So that's going to be different for him. And that will be demanding on him, because they will want their piece of him. Every network, every journalist down there during the course of fight week, and maybe he won't be quite expecting that. Maybe he will take his eye off the ball ever so slightly, albeit subconsciously. These things can happen. They'll need to for John to be able to beat him, I think, because, of course, Canelo's a massive favourite. But it's always worth looking at reasons and scenarios whereby things can just stack up a bit and make enough of a difference.
The first time that he's boxed there since 2011 against Kermit Cintron.
There you go. So he's now Canelo megastar, which he's never been before when he's boxed there. And that, like I say, that they'll try and control it as much as they can. But as we said previously, different environments are different. The way that the press events are run are different in different countries. We know that from going to various countries. I know that from different sports, from football. Some places they can be very regimented. Other places it's more of an open house type policy. That's just how it goes. And you see athletes, not just in boxing, in certain places be literally pulled around, not really having any say in the matter, because particularly if they're a homecoming star, they feel like, you're our property. I don't know if that's going to happen to him, but it could. And that, that's not what you need during the week of a fight. So it's worth thinking about things like that. And as you say, John, by comparison, it'll be that kind of scene you see in films where this whole caravan of people sweeps past following the mega star, and the other guy's just kind of sitting there watching it.
Well, John, you'll be welcome on ID Boxing. I will be out there.
Always.
So as much time as you want to spend with us, and I'll be grabbing Canelo as well and dragging him around wherever I want him.
But they love fighters there, don't they? And
they do.
I know like Liam Smith still gets recognised by Mexican fans whenever he goes to Vegas or anywhere in America because he fought Canelo. So it's not, they will be very interested in John, but it'll just be, I think it'll be quite entertaining for him to just see how much Alvarez has got on his plate and how much pressure is on him. And I think it might give him a little bit of a lift and just think, I don't care who you are, this is something to handle.
And John Ryder doesn't strike, I don't profess to know him massively well at all, but he doesn't strike me as the type of person to be bothered whether or not he's fighting in Guadalajara or Guildford.
No, I think he is like that. Yeah, I think that's definitely him. He's a professional, and like I say, stuck at it, and that's what being a professional means. You know, you have to take the knockbacks, you have to take the disappointments. Success, as the saying goes, is just managing to go from one disappointment to the next without losing enthusiasm. And in boxing, that can be doubly, triply true, can't it? Because you could get the rough end of the stick, and no one cares. And you've got to persevere. And he's done all of that. So there's no way that he's going to go to fight week and be blown away by the magnitude of it and lose his bottle, basically. I just don't see that happening. That's not to say that it couldn't happen that Canelo turns in an absolutely electrifying performance and it's a very tough, painful night for him. That could happen, but he won't. He's not going to beat himself, basically.
No, I agree. Just on Canelo, you mentioned there about kind of the pressure of him fighting at home. It's the first time at home in 11 and a half years or wherever it will be by the time fight night comes around. But he's also not had the best of spells recently. I mean, I mentioned the Gennady-Golovkin trilogy bout. I think it's fair to say that the general consensus was Gennady-Golovkin at 40 or 41 or whatever he was, fighting at a weight class he's never competed at, certainly as a professional. And Canelo didn't really do the job on him that some were expecting him to potentially do, particularly after looking at, so good at 168 pounds before then. Of course, before that, he was beaten in really good fashion and really one-sided fashion by Dmitry Bivol. So there's a different kind of pressure, I think, on Canelo in this fight that we haven't really seen. Okay, we saw it, I guess, periods in the build-up to the Gennady-Golovkin fight, but this is somebody who, again, we'd seen kind of not look great against Ryota Murata. We'd already had the 2 fights with him. The general feeling was that this was Canelo getting somebody at the tail end of their career, as it seems to have kind of transpired. We don't really know if Gennady-Golovkin's going to box again after that. But I think this is probably the first time in his career, really, where he's had... I know he had it when he boxed Mayweather and then he boxed Erislandy Lara, where he'd had those kind of issues. But that wasn't, as you mentioned before, the Canelo brand, the Canelo Superman, where, I mean, you go back a couple of fights ago, people were talking about him beating Alexander Usyk, they were talking about him beating Anthony Joshua, Ilunga Makabu, probably slightly different level to those guys, with all due respect to him. But now we fast forward, it kind of shows the fickle nature of the sport where, okay, he loses to Dmitry Bivol, who's a world-class light heavyweight, fully fledged light heavyweight, and then he beats clearly, but doesn't dominate Gennady-Golovkin. And all of a sudden, you've got people like me and everybody saying, is this not the end for Canelo, but are we on the back nine with him?
Yeah, and that's my question with him is, where is his career going now, really? Because, as you say, everything got a bit ridiculous at one point when he's cleaned out that super middleweight division in great fashion, was very active that year, boxed 4 times that one year, I think, and that was great to see. It was a great example to set. If somebody like him can do that and box with that regularity, then why can't everybody else? If you're him, you call the shots is the kind of counter to that. But at the same time, it was really... I loved it. I think everybody did. And at that point, people are talking all sorts of nonsense about cruiserweight and heavyweight. And, it was madness, wasn't it? A lot of it. But it was easy to get carried away with it because you got this guy who is this massive, massive star. But now, I'm not really sure where he is going because super middleweight, that's done. Is there anyone coming through? We talked about Benavidez. How interested is he in that fight? Canelo, though, that's the point. It doesn't really matter how interested we are in things. It just comes down to how interested he is and what's going to motivate him. Going back up to light heavy and fighting Bivol again definitely does motivate him, but most people would agree that that's not a very good idea. So I'm not really sure. And another thing I was wondering about the other day is, if he beats John and then say he retires the next day, how would you assess his career in terms of him being an all-time great? People talk about him as being an all-time great Mexican fighter, an all-time great fighter, full stop. He'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer, absolutely no question, and he's been undisputed at super middleweight, and we know the things that he's done, but I don't know myself, because when you look at the record and you look at the resume, one of the big pluses is the 2-0 trilogy win against Golovkin. But I don't really accept it. And I know that's not his fault because he doesn't control the judges. But I don't count that third fight because Golovkin was 40 and it's super middleweight. I felt Golovkin won the first fight. I thought he won the second one as well, actually. But I didn't have any big deal with Canelo winning the second one. And I know I'm picking holes, and I know you can do this to any fighter's record, but for me, that is so central to his kind of canon, if you like. I'm just not really sure, reputation-wise, where he sits if, let's say, he doesn't really do anything else of any great significance.
Yeah, and it's a good point, and it's something that you can always talk about with any kind of leading fighter, particularly a money fighter. I mean, people do it now with Gervonta Davis, somebody who's made a load of money and is kind of, he has accolades, but okay, well, people say, well, he never boxed Lomachenko in 2016 or 2017. Or
yeah, you can always do it. And those first two Golovkin fights were amazing.
Brilliant
They absolutely lived up to the hype, and it takes two, and they were brilliant. And they were close enough. It's not like he didn't play his part just because I don't think that the results were the ones that we should have caught. It doesn't mean that they don't mean anything, those performances. It's just that I don't think he can take the full juice from them that you normally would.
Well, if they were, I had Golovkin winning the first fight quite clearly. The second fight, I actually had Canelo nicking it, but I couldn't have argued either way. And then the third fight kind of was what it was, which I think everybody kind of has put to one side, really, even in the wake of kind of the last fight in the build up to this. I mean, I did it earlier on in here, and then you kind of look at Sergey Kovalev 8 weeks after the. It sounds like we're going to be kind of like slagging Canelo off here. We're not. It's just
that's not the intention.
It's the nitpicking that you do with great fighters.
It's not his fault that at super middleweight at the time there wasn't a dance partner. That's just how that was, and that happens to people, and it's not their fault. And it's why people for a long time were, and still are, reluctant to admit that Vladimir Klitschko was a great heavyweight champion, because there was it just didn't happen for him, did it, in terms of opponents? Yeah,
and you need those dance partners. And look, we hear about it a lot. We heard about this past weekend, by the time this goes out, a couple of weekends ago, between Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia. We've seen Canelo kind of do his whole Canelo weight period of his career, where he's boxing at 155. He's making fighters come down in weight. He boxed Miguel Cotto for the middleweight world title. And again, that was kind of, a 140 and a 140, 147 on his best day, Miguel Cotto, fighting up at middleweight at 155. And yeah, it was all very strange. But I guess for me, it's sort of where he's at in his career now. Where do the challenges lie? As you've mentioned, David Benavidez, I think we all agree it's a big challenge to him, but where does what's the juice for him in something like that? Because he's made all of the money that he could ever possibly wish to make. He's got all of the accolades that he's ever possibly could have imagined. I feel like the only thing that's left for him to do is to beat Dmitry Bivol at 175 pounds, or beat a legitimate 175 pounder.
If he can do that, then any reservations I would have, or any kind of argument that I've just posited, is wiped out, because that would be, to be able to turn around that first fight, that would be a massive thing. I'm really interested
to see what happens with it, because he'd said for a long time that's the fight that he wanted. And from the competitive point of view, he'd always said he wanted to do it 175 pounds. We're now hearing from Vadim Kornilov. Anyone who knows Vadim Kornilov, real smooth operator. It's always great to hear from him. Very smooth operator from World of Boxing. And he said, look, we're happy to do the fight, but we want the fight at 168 because Bivol wants, the 168 pound undisputed title. For him, he could, I could beat Canelo. I've already beat him, no problem. I'd go back up and beat Beterbiev. Sounds really easy when you're Dmitry Bivol. Anybody else would probably have nightmares about that. But I think from Canelo's point of view, and we've seen him, and we spoke to him at the convention. I had to zoom him in because he didn't come to the convention, which was strange. Fly all the way across to Mexico to do a Zoom, but anyway. And he'd said that he wanted to fight him at 175 because he didn't want people to say, oh yeah, well he beat you at 175. You drained him, you brought him down to 168, you slapped a rehydration on him, and yeah, you beat him, but you didn't really win the first one.
And how great is that? That speaks volumes about him. And I am an admirer. I've always loved watching him fight, and I do think he's terrific. And that tells you who he is, that he doesn't want a rematch on what would seem to be totally fair terms. He went up to his weight, so why shouldn't he come down to yours for the rematch? But he doesn't want it because that's who he is. That's the competitive beast that he is. Maybe they'll end up meeting somewhere in the middle, but I don't think Canelo would even be happy with that, would he? He wants to beat him at 175, and I don't see it happening. I think we would get the same thing again, most likely. But at the same time, even another defeat, if it's a really good fight and it's closer, that can still go quite a long way to burnishing your record, your resume. They don't always have to be wins, do they?
No, they don't. And to be fair, I didn't think he boxed very well against Bivol. And it wasn't, obviously he lost the fight. Bivol's a world-class fighter, elite fighter. It's not to say that, if he'd have boxed better, he would have won. He maybe never would have. It was always going to be a hard style for him, particularly at the added weight and added size of Bivol. But before then, you kind of spoke about he boxed 4 times in about 13 months. He boxed Callum Smith in the December, boxed Avni Yildirim, I think the February or the March, and he did Saunders in May, Plant in September. So it must have been like within a year.
He was really quick.
But I felt like even in that period of time, even the Plant fight, I felt like I didn't think he boxed particularly well. I thought he'd looked more sluggish than he'd looked prior to that. I felt like Plant was able to we spoke about this before, I felt like Plant was able to give him some problems by not really doing an awful lot of wizardry. He was kind of boxing on the back foot. He was fairly negative, and he was disciplined, Plant, and he's a good fighter. But I felt like it took
he was in
Canelo,
this kind of beast mode, wasn't he?
Yeah, where he's like, I'm going to come forward, and I'm going to hit you, and you're going to stop.
And I'm going to beat on your arms until they drop, and all that kind of thing. And it worked. He didn't do that against Golovkin because he needed more than that. And he needed more than that against Bivol. But I think, you're right. He was kind of like stuck on that track, wasn't he? Stuck on those kind of rails of, this is how I do things. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are, how much you kind of tell yourself that at no point will you ever fall for, drinking your own Kool-Aid, if you like. But, I mean, how can you not?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it doesn't mean that you've totally lost your head and got totally carried away with your own sense of greatness or anything like that. It can just be a couple of % where you just think, there's no reason for me to think that won't work, because it's always it's working, isn't it?
And he's kind of had those periods in his career where people always talk about the Mayweather fight and the lessons that he learned from that. I also feel like he took some stuff from the Golovkin fights. I think after that we saw more of him as the front foot kind of stalking, low output pressure fighter. I mean, obviously Golovkin was busier on the front foot, but still Canelo was kind of get that front foot in the middle, wait for you to make a mistake or panic and land the big singles. I'm just wondering now at this stage of his career where he gets, and I agree, he's sort of 32, but he's sort of like, you have kind of your age and then your miles on the clock.
That's
and he does have a lot of miles on the clock. And I just wonder if he has I'm not necessarily, with all due respect to John Ryder, I don't necessarily think he needs to kind of reinvent the wheel in this instance. I feel like what he's done, certainly in recent fights, is likely to be enough against John Ryder. But if he's going in there with a Dmitry Bivol at 175 pounds, or a David Benavidez or a David Morrell, fresh, young, hungry guys at 168 pounds, is he going to need to do something not different, but is he going to need to evolve and change from the Canelo that we've seen in his last couple of fights? Because I feel like the Canelo that we've seen in his last couple of fights, again, no disrespect, because he's boxing Dmitry Bivol and Gennady Golovkin, who, they will go down as kind of, certainly Gennady Golovkin. I think Bivol's probably got a little bit more to do, but greats of their era, certainly of the weight class. But he wasn't at his best in those fights. And I feel like where we've seen the best of Canelo is where he's been able to learn from fights where he's not necessarily boxed as well as he could have, or add to his game in areas where he's not really as complete now. I feel like in 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and certainly he felt like he'd become, the complete fighter. And once you're complete, by kind of definition, you don't have to add these little bits and pieces. Just wondering whether or not he has that additional kind of, or even if he has, I'm sure he does. And if you asked him now, do you have the desire to do that and change and learn? Of course he's going to say yes. But again, as you've said, hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, all of the accolades that you could ever want. He's Canelo. He's the great Canelo. Like, does he have that in him at this stage of his career to go to the well and change and develop so he can be more prepared for a Benavidez or a Morrell? Or are we just overthinking things and he came up against two great fighters?
I think it's a bit of both, really, because in terms of his desire to take it to that next level and adapt and evolve, he will definitely want to. It's just whether he actually can or not. And sometimes you want to do something and you believe you've got the desire to do it, and then to your surprise, you discover actually you haven't really, because you're not 25 anymore wanting to prove the world wrong. And things change. You just get to different periods of your life, and your motivation changes, and your hunger changes. What keeps somebody on top for a really long time is their ability to sustain that hunger. But at some point with anyone, it will dissipate, and he could well be there. I just think it's as simple as right heavyweight's just too big for him. I think it's as simple as that, because he's 5'8", and he is built like a tank. But the difference against Bivol was that those shelling attacks that would just break people down didn't break him down.
We spoke about it on probably would have been the Golovkin preview or review, where in the build up to that fight, kind of playing back into what we were talking about, where everyone said Canelo's going to do this and Canelo's going to do that, and kind of people were looking at Dmitry Bivol, who had dominated Joe Smith, Jean Pascal. Like he'd shown his credentials as a genuine world class, certainly after the fight, considered like an elite fighter. And there was the great interviews. One of my favourite kind of interview moments, I guess, as well. I can't remember who did the interview, but anyway, asking Bivol about it, and him fighting Alexander Usyk and him fighting this, and this is before the Canelo fight, and you can just see the look of confusion and sort of like he just completely baffled Dmitry Bivol. He's like, but people keep talking about him like he's 5'8", he's going to come up to my weight class, he's going to beat me and fight Usyk. He's like, you guys think he's some sort of god, some Superman. He's like, that's just not going to happen. And there was, look, you could, we all, we cover boxers and we cover fighters, and you can sort of see sometimes when somebody's like putting it on, maybe. He was genuinely so confused by everybody's suggestions.
I find very few things more convincing than just genuine bewilderment.
Yeah.
Because you've said something that they can't even process. They've got no answer ready for it, ready to go. They've got no line for it, because what you've just said to them is so absurd. All they can do is give you a genuine reaction. And I do remember that, because he was just, a lot of things are done through a translator with him as well, obviously. And sometimes he might be thinking to himself, did he really say that? Or can you just not really speak English? Or what's happening here? And yeah, he was utterly flabbergasted by it, wasn't he? And you can understand, you can understand why. Like everybody, I thought Canelo, I think when we did it, I said that I felt like Bivol could do enough that it would be really close, but he wouldn't get it. That it would be close enough that it could go either way, but it being close enough to go either way, it's in Las Vegas, Canelo will get the decision. But I don't really know too many people who just said, apart from our good pal of ours, Chris Lloyd, who did say, but he'll be too big.
I'd like to throw out that I actually predicted that Bivol would win.
Oh no, you did as well. That's true. That's true.
No, I mean, Chris Lloyd, obviously love Chris Lloyd, but it was me as well.
How did I forget that? That was a blank out my memory.
It's the only one that I get right, so I like to keep bringing it up. No,
possible. You should. But everybody, most people were thinking he was another tree there to be chopped down, which is what Canelo was doing at the minute. He was just wielding that axe, labouring, setting to work with it. And it was just a question of how long could you take it for. Callum Smith managed to take it for the full 12, which at the time, I think people, UK fans were maybe a bit disappointed. They felt like he could have done better. But then in the light of what happened to everybody else, it seemed like a pretty good effort. Yeah,
it did. I remember what you just said there about the light heavyweight division. I was at Canelo Kovalev, and that was November 2019.
Yeah, I commentated on that fight.
And it was 8 weeks to the day since Kovalev had beaten Anthony Yard and almost got stopped by Anthony Yard in Chelyabinsk. And I remember Kovalev's one of the more interesting characters that we've had in boxing over recent years. And he said afterwards, like, anybody who picked me to win that fight was an ignoramus, which is brilliant because, obviously went out there. Cheers, Sergei. I could have told us that beforehand. But anyway, he was winning the fight, or he was certainly in the fight at the time when that was stopped. I think he was level on one card, and I think he was a round down on other cards, but he was winning rounds in that fight. And this was a Kovalev again on like back-to-back camps in mid to late 30s. I mean, he's 36 or whatever. His liver's 65. And he's almost been stopped 8 weeks prior by Anthony Yard. I think that had a rehydration clause in that fight that was very hush-hush around fight week. Nobody could ask about it. And if you asked, you got basically told no.
You got taken out the back.
Yeah. You got a very, very... it was no comment, but not really no comment. But anyway... and I just felt like even that version of Canelo, and that was kind of Canelo, again, sort of at his pomp or sort of there or thereabouts, and he never really kind of lit up the arena in that fight. And then against Bivol, who's a much fresher, much busier, much more active version, well, not version of Kovalev, a fighter in his own right, but a legitimate light heavyweight. I could never really see Canelo getting the job done in a sense of blowing through him, hitting him and hurting him. Obviously, he can punch a bit, but Joe Smith could punch. Joe Smith actually wobbled Bivol at times, but Bivol was able to kind of navigate that
to be honest with you, I wasn't that sold on Bivol when the Canelo fight came along. I felt he was actually a bit overrated, because a lot of it came off the back of that strange one punch knockout against Trent Broadhurst.
Yeah.
And then some good solid wins against, like Joe Smith, like Sullivan Barrera was another one. But there were some spells in there where you looked at it and just thought, I did a few of his fights around that period, and Lennon Castillo was another one where
the Craig Richards fight. Yeah,
Castillo kind of got to him in the final round. He was miles ahead from what I remember. He gave him a little bit of a wobble in the final round, maybe, but it was a little bit underwhelming. Craig Richards, I thought he won that fight clearly enough, and so did he. He couldn't really understand it afterwards when people were talking about it being really close. But I just looked at him and just thought, I'm not really sold on this guy. But I was wrong, because it would appear that he's one of these people who kind of boxes to the level of the person he's in with and does enough to win, but maybe doesn't really blow you away. But against Canelo, doing that is impressive
he boxed
in itself, and he did actually win by a mile as well.
I remember speaking beforehand, and I was quite outspoken on it, because it really annoyed me when I was saying to people, I actually picked Bivol to win a decision, and everyone would tell me, like, I don't spend all of my time watching boxing. Yeah, but it's in Vegas. Like, I know it's in Vegas. Yeah, but he won't get the decision. Yeah, but he might get the decision if he wins 10 rounds to 2, which is kind of what we saw.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I didn't think he could do, because I felt that he would need to win 9-3. He'd definitely need to win 8-4 to get any kind of, and a clear 8-4 to get a decision. And I didn't think he was capable of that.
And even at the time, it was a 115, 113 across all 3 cards, and he won 10 rounds at least of that fight. I mean, that kind of spoke volumes.
I thought he was capable of a 6-6, which he's never going to get.
Yeah.
But I didn't think he was capable of that.
He had that weird fight, didn't he, against Umar Salamov before then. Bivol, and you can imagine those guys have probably known quite a bit about each other going through the amateurs, and again he's probably looking at that thinking, I can beat this guy, man, like, I want a big fight, where's Beterbiev, where's Canelo, just go for it, sort of goes through the motions. And I agree with you, I think he is somebody who kind of boxes to the level of his opposition, and whatever he needs to do, he'll just kind of raise it. I thought he was really good against Gilberto Ramirez back in November.
He was actually,
and that kind of seemed to me to be a guy who, on the back of the Canelo fight especially, sort of grown into himself as a fighter now, and like, this is who I am.
Because he knows this is the business end for him. He's kind of bided his time. He got a world title early after a sprawling amateur career, which had loads and loads and loads of fights, but didn't actually see him win all that much because it's difficult to be number one in Russia. And he just knew, I've got myself in this position now, and I can coin it now. This is what it's all been about. And he wasn't messing around.
He certainly wasn't. The Mexicutioner, the modern day Mexicutioner. Brilliant nickname that is. Obviously, but kind of more popularised by certain Roger Mayweather. The Mexicutioner. Anyway, back to John Ryder versus Canelo. Just on John Ryder. So he's got a packed stadium around him. Everybody's baying for blood, which I'm sure they will be, even though John Ryder's a lovely man. What does he have to do when that first bell rings? What can he not afford to do, and what does he have to try and do?
I think the problem for John really is that the way that John likes to fight is kind of the way that Canelo would like you to fight if you're fighting him. But I don't think he can really second guess himself and think too much about the opponent, which might sound a bit mad considering who he's in with. But you've just got to always try and maximise your own strengths as much as you can. The way he's gone about things so far, John, has got him to this point, and he should just stick to that. And if he gets outdone by Canelo comprehensively doing that, then so be it. But what I don't see any point in this scenario, particularly given the circumstances and the fact that it will be intimidating, he is a level-headed guy. I think he's mentally strong, but at the same time, you've got tens of thousands of Mexicans, like you say, and they will want to see Canelo put on the show and knock John out. They want to see John Ryder stretched out, unconscious on the canvas in the middle of thousands of them going absolutely mental. That's what they want. So you can't underestimate the sort of pressure that will put you under. he can't be reckless or gung-ho, obviously, but he's not really that guy anyway, is he? He keeps it nice and tight, nice and compact. And yeah, he's just got to do his thing to the absolute best of his ability. But I think he's in that unfortunate position where, like I say, the way he likes to do it is the way that Canelo would be keen on someone trying to do it.
Yeah, I'm quite interested to see what how he does approach the fight. I don't think he's going to be doing anything that's kind of untoward for him. I don't think we see John Ryder kind of throwing spanners in the works and starting to fight orthodox or anything crazy like that.
No.
But I do feel like it's important that he starts well. I think he needs to have some sort of success early.
He's got to be confident.
Yeah, that's it.
He's got to be confident. It doesn't mean you're reckless or gung-ho. You've got to, against any opponent, even if you feel that you're a lot better than them, you've got to be confident but not give anything away. Yeah, if you're the real A side and your opponent is supposedly levels below you, the only way it can really go wrong is if you box like a dickhead. Never ever box like a dickhead. It's just kind of like the number one lesson, isn't it? Definitely not against Canelo, but just never. Keep it tight, keep it disciplined, focus, concentration, all of those things. But you have got to be confident and believe that if you hit him clean, like anybody else, you can hurt him, but that's got to be in your head.
Seems like a mental thing to say, because even in the Bivol fight, I mean, I'm certainly sure that he felt some of those shots from a fully fledged light heavyweight, but we've not seen Canelo really buzzed or visibly hurt really since. I mean, he boxed Jose Miguel Cotto back in when that was his American debut, 2010.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Or 2009.
That's a long time.
But it would be nice. It'd be interesting if John Ryder can go and just land a solid left hand early in the fight, the first round, the second round, something that, again, because I think everybody in the arena, apart from his team, really, being John Ryder's team, are going there, a formality, really. They feel like Canelo will go in and maybe have a look for the first couple of rounds and eventually kind of pick up the pace, and before you know it, he'll stop him. He'll land a shot, body shot, headshot, whatever, and get rid of him. If Ryder can go there, keep things nice and tight, because I think, as well, I mean, super middleweight is not the deepest division, certainly now, since Canelo kind of ran through it, especially. But John Ryder is a legitimate guy at 168 pounds. I think some people can kind of be confused with, and kind of not naming any names, but some of our kind of challengers from the UK can kind of, Americans always do it, don't they? Yeah, but that's the UK. Oh, but he's a British fighter, and sometimes they're proven right.
John's not that.
But he's a legitimate world-class super middleweight fighter.
Yeah.
If he can go there and land something early in the fight and try as best as he can to take some of the sting out of the crowd and try and quieten them, I mean, that's going to be some sort of task. I think that's the early fight's so important. The early rounds of the fight are so important. If he's going to have a legitimate shot of springing what would be, as we kind of mentioned, one of the biggest upsets, certainly in British boxing history.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, it'd be a cataclysmic, upset if he managed to pull this one off. We know the names. It's probably still Hunnigan, isn't it? Against Don Curry, that's probably still the biggest. But you look at John H. Stracey and Jose Napolez and Ken Buchanan against Ismael Laguna, and you think
Robinson.
Yeah, absolutely. You're thinking about ones away from home where you're going to environments where you're really unfamiliar. Then it's Stracey and Buchanan probably. It'd be unbelievable. It would be absolutely unbelievable. But you're right about John being a legit guy, because he is. You look at what he did against Callum Smith, and it's not like that was some kind of one-off where he boxed better that night than he's ever boxed before or since. He's turned in a lot of good, solid displays against good fighters. And I just want him to give of his best. It is possible that if Canelo starts well and John is just a fraction hesitant, then it could go.
It could be very one-sided.
Badly. Yeah, that could happen. That could absolutely happen. But what he won't do, and I don't want to be too unkind to Rocky here, but what he won't do is what Rocky Fielding did, which was freeze, because that is what happened with Rocky, and I think he's kind of admitted that since. I don't think he'll do that. I don't think that'll happen.
No, I don't think either. I do, as you have kind of mentioned there, I do feel like if Canelo can get off to a good start, then it's going to be a really hard night. I think it's going to be a hard night anyway. But
you're standing on the tracks of a runaway train.
Yeah,
if that happens.
If Canelo can kind of get the wind in his sails, he tests out the hand, and the hand's fine. And,
yeah.
And Ryder's not.
And he just feels good on the night and all that kind of stuff. And he's really enjoyed fight week rather than it being a bit draining. You know, that whole kind of whirlwind around this fight, and there really will be one, it could knock Canelo slightly off course, or it could have the opposite effect. It could fill his sails in a way that they'd never been before, because, like we say, he's never boxed in Mexico as King Canelo, if you like. So it could be that could kind of work for John, or it could really not. You know, I hope it's the former, but it could be the latter. In which case, you do have an impossible task on your hands, really.
We're not going to ask what comes next for John Ryder if he wins, because if he wins, I'm pretty sure there'll be a rematch clause. So we'll have Ryder Canelo too. So that absolves us from that part of the conversation. If Canelo Alvarez is successful against John Ryder, sorry John, Tony, I'm just doing my job. Don't fancy a week with an upset Tony Sims in Mexico, but anyway, let's move on. Who next for Canelo? Does it got to be the Bivol fight? Bivol at 175. For me personally, I want to see that Benavidez fight. I think that Benavidez fight is great. I think you've got the young, fiery, kind of aggressive animal against the old legend in Canelo. So I think that has that kind of passing of the torch thing for me.
Yeah.
Is that what you want next?
Well, I think the Bivol fight will be what does happen next, because that'll be what he wants, and he's one of the very few fighters where what he wants to happen is what will have to happen. And I love that when athletes have that kind of power over their own careers. It doesn't happen often, and in boxing there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, but I think that's what he will want. And it's what Team Bivol will want, because why wouldn't you? You know, you've beaten him once, and if he's going to insist on coming back up to your weight, I don't imagine them putting up too much of a fight about and saying, "Oh no, it's got to be 168, or we won't give you the rematch." If you're Bivol, I know that's what he wants from what you said, but surely you're just going to think, "Oh, all right, then we'll do it at 175."
Yeah, I get paid more money than I did the first time. I'd already beat him easy.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So I don't see that being a real sticking point. So I think that's what will happen. I am keen on that Benavidez fight. I mean, Morel was calling his name after his epic, supersonic win on the Davis Garcia undercard, and I'm very interested in that. But Benavidez probably isn't. You know, he's just going to want to fight Canelo, isn't he? And outside of Bivol, that is kind of the only other one that really interests me.
Yeah, in an ideal world, and of course boxing is far from an ideal world, as we all know. It'd be nice to see Morel versus Benavidez, and the winner fights Canelo. Almost makes too much sense, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, loads of things make too much sense, don't they? I was really impressed with Morel. I've watched him quite a bit before, but he's just like, as a physical specimen, he's pretty amazing, isn't he? He looks like he's actually, for the weight, at about 6'1", I think he is. He's not that tall, but he looks like he is.
Very solid.
Yeah, and he's got massive shoulders and ridiculously long arms. Just all tools that a lot of top fighters have, because they just make you suited to the sport. Like the first time he walked into the gym, when he was how old, you guarantee the coaches would have looked at him and just seen the length of his arms and thought, that's already a good start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's kind of like part of this new wave of, I mean, Cuban fighters in general kind of come with a lot of stigma attached to them as not always being the most entertaining fighters. Or one of my favourite fighters of recent years, Arislandi Lara, he's become a little bit more of a banger recently because his legs have gone. But generally speaking, him and Rigondo, and they're kind of, labelled with boring fighters. I mean,
they just do it how they want to do it.
Exactly. Whereas you've got somebody like Morel, and at times your mate Robesi Ramirez as well will go in there and we'll have a go. And I think with Morel, you've got somebody who is freakishly athletic combined with that schooling. And once you've got that, as well as the kind of, the natural athleticism combined with however many amateur fights that he had, and the more more aggressive mindset, then you've got something really special.
Yeah, the understanding of what it is that people want to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
And you definitely get that in American gyms. That's how they spar. That's how they do everything. This is show business with blood. People want to see entertainment here. Let's not be squeamish.
Absolutely.
Box and move is great. That's fine. But ultimately, if you want to make it big, it's about getting people to buy a pay-per-view. I mean, it's as simple as that, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And particularly with somebody like Morel, who's not, English not his first language, and as a Cuban fighter has to come over, and you have to do something to get the attention. He's certainly doing that in the ring at the minute. Right, before we wrap things up, so we have spoke about Canelo Ryder on a couple of other instances. If you want to go back and watch all of them, please do so. All available on ID Boxing. But let's talk a little bit about the undercard. One fight that I'm really interested in, and we kind of spoke about it, I think on one of the other shows, we must have brought it up, is the return of Alexander Gvozdyk, now under the stewardship, under the management at least, of Eddie Reynoso. Returns, I think he's had a 6-rounder earlier on this year, but of course, former lineal champion, former Ring Magazine, WBC champion at light heavyweight, faces Ricards Bolotniks, who's become, in recent years, probably the away fighter at light heavyweight. He's kind of assumed the mantle of Sullivan Barrera as everybody's favourite measuring stick, Andy.
Yeah, that fight, you when you know that he's with the Reynosos and all the rest of it, then you understand how it's happened. But if you didn't know that and you just kind of scanned down the card and saw that, you'd just be looking down, you just wouldn't, what's happened there? But it's, I mean, I really like it because I think it could be, it should be a really good watch. And I am kind of fascinated by the fact that Gvozdyk has come back, because obviously he had that epic unification with Beterbiev, which didn't go his way. Having won the title from a very long reigning champion in Adonis Stevenson that was a massive win.
Great fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he went into retirement, and I never got to the bottom at the time as to whether that was down to some kind of health issue, whether there was something to do with a scan or not. Things are always rumoured like that when someone calls it a day before you're kind of expecting them to, but I don't know if you know whether...
Yeah, so he was out in Acapulco at the WBC convention in November, and we spoke to him. We'll probably have an interview going out. Just a reminder to Jordan over there that we need to get the Gvozdyk interview out before this weekend. And he sort of said on camera and certainly off camera, and I don't mind sharing it because it was, it wasn't earth-shattering stuff, but he basically said it was the start of the pandemic. He'd had 3 different fight days. He was told, and this was at the time when we were being told by promoters, it'll be a couple of weeks, don't worry, we'll be back in April or whatever it was, and obviously 3 years later we're sort of coming to the end of it. But he said that he'd had these different dates and he had no idea how long COVID was going to last. He had other interests outside the ring that were making him money, other business opportunities that were bringing in money. And he said, look, I'm a boxer, but I have a family. I'm a normal person as well. I don't want to be kind of hanging around in boxing past my sell-by date. I don't want to get hurt. And, if I can make good money outside of the ring and I don't need to worry about it. It was very interesting stuff. It was very kind of objective, rational thinking, which we don't always get from fighters.
No, and I guess off the back of those 2 fights as well, he knows how hard it can be in there.
Yeah. He'd had
the just thinking, unless I'm going to get really well paid, then I'm not doing that again.
Exactly, and he'd had kind of both sides of it. He had the Beterbiev fight, which was obviously a hard fight in which he lost. He had the Stevenson fight, which was a hard fight in which he won. But we saw what happened to Adonis Stevenson afterwards. It's very kind of eye-opening things.
Yeah.
We had it with this man, George Groves, kind of said after he had the fight with Eddie Goodnecht, I want to make my money and I want to get out. I don't want to hang around. It's not going to be me. I want to make my money. And there was kind of that feeling from him. But he said, look, I'm always fit. I'm always in the gym. And kind of I was still staying kind of keep fit, not boxing fit, obviously. And then he went to spar Canelo Alvarez in the build-up to the Bivol fight, which, of course, we've spent large parts of this talking about. And he said that he felt good in there. Then Reynoso had kind of spoke to him about coming back. And obviously things are a lot more, still not completely clear of the world of COVID. Touch wood, we will be. But it's a lot more open now, and you can box and this and that. And that's kind of his reasons for coming back. He said, we kind of asked him in the interview, make sure you check out the interview, what's the motivation for coming back? Do you want to box Beterbiev? Do you want to watch Bivol, box Bivol? And he sort of said he was very kind of honest and open. He said, well, I've already boxed Beterbiev, and he's good and he punches really hard, but I've always kind of, it was a fight that I felt that we kind of missed out on because obviously he'd retired. But Bivol versus Gvozdyk, if Gvozdyk is where he was, and I think, again, Bolotniks is exactly the type of opponent that we need to see that, then that fight's great. I really like that fight. You've got 2 very skilled fighters, both let their hands go as well. They're not negative kind of skilled fighters as we can sometimes see. And Gvozdyk versus Bivol, or Bivol versus Gvozdyk as it would be, I think it's a really, really interesting fight. But yeah, that's basically it. He said that he didn't want to be waiting on the sidelines while he could have been doing other things. He had no idea how long he's going to be out of the ring for. And then when it seemed apparent that he could come back and get opportunities, that's what he did.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And if ever anybody was going to come to that kind of decision, it would be someone who'd had the experiences he'd had in the previous in the previous 2 fights. And I was kind of pleased when I saw him call it a day. I just thought, well, great.
I thought it was a good time for it.
Yeah, great, good decision. He's won a world title, which is what you go into it for. Hopefully he's made some good money. If he's a sensible guy and he's got other things going on, then brilliant. But it's just a hard thing to walk away from if you feel like you've still got the physical capability to do it, and you're also aware that clock's ticking. So if you are going to come back, you've got to do it now. Because he would be at least in his early 30s, wouldn't he? Because it was 10 years ago he won an Olympic bronze medal, 11 years ago in London.
He's 36 now.
Wow, so he's a bit older than I thought, actually. So this really is it. I mean, he's got to do it now. And maybe it'll be short-lived, who knows? Maybe Bolotnik will bring what he always does, and it'll turn out that the gears and all the things you need to really get back to the top level aren't there. And I think if he laboured to a win against Bolotnik, then you'd probably still have one more, wouldn't you, just to rubber stamp the fact that maybe it's not really there anymore. And if it isn't, then I think he'd be off again. I don't see him hanging around if he doesn't feel like he can get a fight with someone like Bivol and potentially win.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for him, if he gets past Bolotniks, and I do think Bolotniks is the right sort of test for somebody at that sort of
he's going to force you to fight, isn't he?
Exactly. And he's not going to go anywhere. And Gvozdyk, while a kind of a sharp, snappy puncher, I mean, Bolotniks is tough. I'd be very surprised if he can get rid of Bolotniks at all, let alone early in a fight. And I'd expect him to have some moments where he has to get past that. We spoke about it in the other podcast about having that name recognition. He's still somebody who, if he's in the top 15 and somebody needs a voluntary, why not him? He beats Ricard's Bolotniks, he's back in the top 15 or the top 10 or whatever it is with a WBC or whoever. You got a voluntary, why not him? Like that seems to be the plan for him. I don't think he's. We had Dan Aziz in here, and he said to me, "Who on camera?" Which I thought was great. He said to me, "Who would you have me fight next?" I was kind of like, "Jesus Christ, they really put me on the spot here." I remember saying, Bolotniks is fighting Gvozdyk, somebody like that would be perfect, like a Bolotniks. And he said, well, the winner of that fight. I say, yeah, but with respect, if Gvozdyk wins that fight, he's not going to fight Dan Aziz. He wants to fight for a world title, or he wants a big fight. So you'd think any sort of win would probably put him in line for a good fight at 175 pounds. Bivol, after he's fought Canelo again or whatever he wants to do, if he has a voluntary, I think that could be a fight that's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It really will be interesting to see what happens with that division anyway, because Beterbiev, I'm not saying that he's going to pack it in any time particularly soon, but I was at that fight against Anthony Yard, and we were near the Beterbiev corner, and when he sat on his stool after 5 rounds, and Yard had a good round, and he was coming on quite strong, Anthony, and he sat down, and they were massaging his calves, Beterbiev rather, and saying to him, "You're behind, you need to pick it up." And I looked at him, and he was a little bit marked up, and he was blowing a bit, and I just thought to myself, Anthony Yard is doing exactly what he needs to do here. He's taking him to that place where he could start to feel old. And he's a great champion, and he turned it around and he got the win. But I just remember that really clearly, because I'm just thinking, yes, because they did want Yard to win. Yes, Yard is doing what he needs to do here. Because he had quite a ropey start, Anthony. The third round was rough. And then he recovered, and I thought, he's taking him there. He's taking him there. And he wasn't quite ready to not surrender. Someone like him never would. But he wasn't quite ready to surrender to Father Time, put it that way. And have that night where, at the end of it, he says, well, I just came up against a younger, hungrier guy tonight. I thought I still had it in the locker to really dig it out, and it's not quite there anymore. He just wouldn't have it. But that's going to happen soonish. And then some belts might become available. And, maybe we'll see Gvozdyk over here. Who knows?
Gvozdyk versus Callum Smith.
Yeah. That could happen, yeah.
Smith versus Beterbiev.
I don't think it will take Frank long to maneuver Anthony Yard back towards the world title shot.
No, and rightly so, considering the performance that he put in against the.
It just might open up,
I agree.
Either he gets beaten and people slap mandatories or whatever, or he doesn't. And
we're kind of in that position now, and I think with Beterbiev, he wants that undisputed fight. And I think, unfortunately, while Dmitry Bivol is a Russian and he's apparently not.
It's not going to happen, is it?
Then it's not going to happen. There was this thing a couple of days ago where it was like. It's completed. The talks have broken down between Bivol and Beterbiev. Look, when did they start? I mean, Callum Smith's been mandatory with the WBC.
That
the WBC
fight,
won't sanction the Russian.
It's interesting you say that, because that fight has never, ever, ever seem to appear like it's ever going to happen.
And it's been on the table for a long time.
Yeah. In terms of who's got the belt, no one ever talks about that, do they?
No, it's not like. I mean, it looks as though. Well, I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but it looks as though we might get Spence Crawford. But yeah, it's kind of never been.
Neither side seems to have. Well, no, Beterbiev does seem to want it, but the Bivol world of boxing, isn't it? Vadim and those fellas, they. Yeah, if but I mean, if you're Bivol, if they're not interested in it, it's not happening, is it?
But if you're Bivol, you probably look like, or maybe not Bivol, because I mean, fighters, you kind of take fighters away from these conversations because they'll fight anybody, like they don't mind.
But that's true. But I think particularly the way things are set up, the way that some Eastern European, Russian fighters are kind of managed, and they do what they're told.
Yeah, no,
I think that's fair.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I think that's fair 100%. And I think those people who are in charge of those conversations are probably going, yeah, we could fight Canelo, like, and get paid a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I feel like while that's kind of still floating around the mix for Bivol, it's going to be difficult to see him take one of those other big major fights. With respect to Zurdo Ramirez and whoever that of comes after that. While you've still got that potential Canelo he's not the actual A side, but you know what I mean. Like, he won the first fight, so you'd think he's going to get well paid for the second fight, and absolutely no reason why to think that he wouldn't win the fight. Going to be difficult to say, okay, fight Beterbiev, and of course, like, again, like, this is a real thing. The WBC won't sanction Dmitry Bivol because he's Russian and Beterbiev apparently isn't. And then of course the WBC mandatory, which always happens again. Like, after this fight, the last two fights with Smith Beterbiev. The fight before then was Yard, which is a mandatory. The Smith fight, another mandatory. I don't know who is the IBF mandatory. I think it was Fan Longmen, then it was Jean Pascal, and Jean Pascal just got beat, didn't he?
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be. Actually, you never know. Beterbiev could be drowned in mandatories, and from his perspective, he doesn't want to give up. He doesn't give up any belts. He wants the undisputed fight, so he's going to keep doing the mandatories until either there's no mandatories left or he gets beat, and then we don't see the fight anyway. Right, okay, before we wrap things up, elsewhere on the undercard, we'll say this weekend because it will go out on Fight Week, we see the return of Julio Cesar Martinez. Thankfully, he's managed to get rid of the Williams Arroyo fight. I think that's been cancelled for the 7th time.
Yeah, some things just get to the point where
it's just cursed.
There's no point in it. No one takes it seriously.
They had the fight, and then there was the head clash, and it's just, my God. Like, it seems like we've been on Martinez versus Arroyo, and it seems like it because it's true, for the last 2 years. Unfortunately, well, depending on how you look at it, Arroyo was not available for this. So Martinez returns in pretty low-key defense of his title, but it looks as though, and certainly seems like, we may get that Sonny Edwards fight, who of course now is signed with Matchroom. I think it's got to be a big fight for Martinez, hasn't it, soon?
You'd hope so, because what's he really doing at the minute? That's what you got to kind of ask yourself, because he emerged with a bit of a bang, and he's good to watch, and he just seemed to have everything you could really want going for him. And that was such an obvious fight to make, him against Edwards. I can understand why his team haven't been keen, because Sonny Edwards is, stylistically, for someone like Martinez, is just like the worst possible fight. Even though he's got a belt. But it would be great to see them finally get that on, because the backstory's maybe not quite as interesting now as it was, because it's a little bit further removed. The night he had against Charlie, and I was there for that, and it was mad, because I remember talking to Mark Lyson about it, the referee, like a couple of days afterwards, because he called me and said, "Have you got Charlie Edwards' number?" I just wanted to kind of. Didn't feel like he needed to explain himself, but he just wanted to talk to him, which I thought was really good.
Good guy, Mark.
And he just said to me, and he just said, "No excuses, I missed it. But the reason I missed it was because it was so late. He threw it so late, I'd already looked at it and thought, right, I know what's going on there. I need to get over there to pick up the count, and so I can see both fighters." And he turned around and stepped over, and it was when his back was turned was when it happened. Anyway, but even that from Martinez, you kind of just think, all right, okay, he's one of them, is he? He's got a bit of that in him, and you kind of, although we all condemn it in public, we sort of like it, don't we?
It is. You want to see he's a Mexican wild man, isn't he? He's like a little Mexican Tasmanian devil.
Yeah, and that's always what he's seemed to be. So yeah, he does need a big fight, because otherwise it just looks like he's avoiding people.
Well, he had that. It must be. I mean, I don't envy certainly Eddie Reynoso is manager, and I mean, I don't know who's matching on that side of the pond for the US. Probably Kevin Rooney, I'd imagine. I don't envy them because he's had hand injuries, weight injuries, all kinds of weight injuries, hand issues, weight issues. I've got some weight injuries myself. And then it must be incredibly frustrating to try and plan a career path for somebody like him, because is he a flyweight? Is he going to be super fly? No, he could be super feather, depending on. I've seen some photos of him where he's definitely at least a super feather. I kind of had that. He had the fight where he stepped in at late notice against Chocolatito, which, you know, probably you're never going to turn a fight like that down because of who Chocolatito is at those weight classes. He's a modern great and he's a living legend. But, you know, it's a fight where he got a real pasting. And it's kind of, he's in a position now where I don't think his stock is anywhere near what it was either.
No, it's not. It's definitely dropped.
Yeah, and you've got like more and more attention now on the lower weight classes where it's kind of.
Well, Rodriguez has emerged and kind of just sprinted
Rodriguez
past him, hasn't he?
I know Nakatani's now moved up, but Nakatani was at flyweight.
But he was the man. He was the man because he kind of appeared and he was great to watch.
He had the Canelo
explosive
thing and the Reynoso thing and all that.
Yeah, exactly. He was the guy. And through kind of indecision or an unwillingness to really make what seemed like quite obvious moves, someone like Rodriguez comes along and just say, I'll have that fight and that one, and wins them all, and all of a sudden, you know, he's the guy.
I mean, there's nothing to suggest that he wouldn't have beaten Srisaket or Rungvisai, Carlos Quadras. I think there would have been harder fights for him than what they were for Rodriguez, just because of the styles. But he could have had them. He could have been in position had he have been a bit more active.
That's the point, isn't it?
And had people kind of banging the drum. I just think that. And also from his perspective, and if you're in the Julio Cesar Martinez business, as it were, an Edwards fight 18 months ago, 2 years ago, is probably, it's not even probably about it. It's a much different fight now. He's had the Umtalani wins, and he's been very active. The win over Mohamed Wasim, Felix Alvarado's a very good win. And now you kind of look at that fight and think, okay, beforehand, I understand the style, but still Edwards was kind of largely unproven, certainly at world level. Now he's very much proven at world level, while Martinez is kind of flattered to deceive in some fights. He had that fight with Samuel Carmona, which wasn't great in that, and Carmona's another mover and somebody who can kind of make you look bad, and you think Edwards is the level above that, and now it's like, okay, now I can see why you maybe wouldn't want that fight, whereas before there was seemingly more reasons to do it than not.
Yeah, that was the time to do it. Delaying that, as it's turned out, was not a good idea if you're actually going to then do it rather than just avoid it forever, which we see people do sometimes. I would make Edwards a favourite in that fight.
Yeah, and quite a significant favourite.
Yeah, quite a significant favourite. And, you know, he's with Matchroom now, Sonny, and actually he didn't have a bad year last year in terms of activity either, because he boxed twice. He probably would have boxed 3 times if he could have done. But other people who were signed to Pro Bellum at that point basically didn't fight at all, a lot of them. So he managed to get 2 fights in, which made sure that everything kept rolling on. One of them was a mandatory and a tough one, like you said. And he's a bit of a name now, Sonny, as well. You know, he did some commentary the other weekend. I thought he did a good job on that, which didn't surprise me. You know, he's a good talker. He will sell a fight. He knows how to sell a fight. And he understands that at the lower weights you need to do all that kind of stuff to make people interested in you. And if that were to happen, that fight, where would you anticipate that being? That's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because
there's Mexico.
Team Reynoso will feel like they have the power,
yeah,
and that they can have it where they want it. Mm. But then Eddie might well think, not so sure about that, lads. You know, Sonny Edwards is a bit of a name in the UK now. We could do something in London.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it was the fight was. So I think I've said this on a pod before. I don't care anyway. Where I actually went up to the gym in Steel City. I think it was, I don't know, October. I think September, October time, and I did an interview with Sonny, 40 odd minutes, as if the fight with Martinez was done, as if it had been announced and we're ready to go, and we had a date, and had a venue, and all sorts. And obviously the fight naturally didn't happen, making my whole trip up there completely useless.
It's a nice gym though, isn't it?
It's a nice gym,
nice big roomy gym.
It'd be nice if it was 20 minutes down the road.
Some kind of old church building, I guess,
it's the cleanest gym, by the way, in the world, because
it is really clean.
It has to clean the
Rivaled
gym.
only by the new Peacock up in Epping. Martin Bowers he must be some kind of
neat freak,
clean freak as well, because that place is unreal.
I've not actually been there, so I'll reserve further judgment on that. Coming up next in our cleanest gyms in boxing here at ID Boxing. But yeah, I'd said to him about it then, and I think at the time there was, I think Arizona had been named as a potential location for it. I know Bam Rodriguez had talked about coming over to the UK. I think there was two options at the time, was either Arizona or Mexico. And Sonny said, "Look, I don't care as long as we have the fight. I don't." And you can sort of see that with him, can you?
I don't really buy into this kind of, let's do it in Arizona because there's a big Mexican American population there, but it's not actually in Mexico. Like the away fighters are going to think, oh great, well I don't want to go to Mexico, because Edwards doesn't care about that.
No,
he'd rather go to Mexico rather than do this kind of halfway house. He's that kind of bloke, isn't he? He just think, look, if you want me to go into into your backyard, into the lion's den, let's do that. It'll be a better occasion, it'll be a better event, it'll be a better everything. Oh, and you can pay me some more, by the way, as well. But that's him, that's who he is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Those halfway house kind of mix and match sort of, let's all compromise. You just end up with a fight in a place where people just don't care about it as much as they would have done if you'd just gone to the UK or Mexico.
Yeah, unless it's going to be kind of chief support on a big card.
Yeah,
like
of course,
San Antonio or something like that,
yeah.
where there's a good contingency. Okay, well, I think that's probably about all we have. Well, we've got plenty of time, but that's about all we've all we've got time for today. Anyway, here on the ID Boxing Podcast. Before I finish up, it's going to be prediction time. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Andy Clark. I'm going to ask you how this weekend goes. Canelo Alvarez versus John Ryder for the undisputed super middleweight titles.
So it pains me to say it, but I'm going to predict a Canelo win. It's a logical choice. You can't really do anything else. And I think he may well stop John quite late. Maybe not kind of like 11th or 12th, but maybe 9 or 10, something like that. And the reason I say that is because I think that John Ryder will go there and not box like a dickhead, but he will go there and try and win. And he will go there believing that he's got a game plan that will enable him to win. And it will be because he pursues that I think he might well end up getting stopped.
Yeah,
but do himself credit.
I think that's about as good a prediction as any. I think something similar. Again, I think if Ryder went there with the sole purpose of not to get stopped, I don't think he would.
But he won't. I don't think he'll do that. Yeah, no, I agree.
I think it will be fairly close. I say fairly close. I don't think much will happen for the first 2 or 3 rounds because, again, despite Canelo kind of having a look and stuff like that, Ryder's not really the type to go there and let loads of shots go. I do think it's important that he lands something of note, but I think that once Canelo kind of grows into the fight, I think that maybe a very late stoppage.
Yeah, I think it could well be the case where, say after 10 rounds, Tony Sims just puts his arm on his shoulder, John, when he comes back to the corner and says, that's enough now. That's enough now. Because those two have been together for a long time. And yeah, he's a top trainer, Tony. He's got that good combination. He's not squeamish, you can't be, but I think he knows, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And it's funny, you said earlier on that, I don't want to spend a week, with a riled up Tony Sims. He's got to be the most reasonable trainer I've ever come across when it comes to what I do. Because I had a spell, I think it's probably towards the end of 2019. It was actually where I just kept scoring against his fighters. Doing a scorecard for Sky, I scored against Cheeseman. And I had Cheeseman a draw against Fitzgerald. I had Selby beating Ricky Burns, which I thought he did, but they felt differently. It was close enough. And actually, Andy Lee, who was doing the scorecard for Callum Smith, he scored for Callum against John. That was Andy's card, not mine, but I didn't have any particular argument with it. And I remember just seeing him in Monaco, and then we were just chatting, and we were just chatting about it in a very, very civilised fashion. He didn't bring it up. He's very zen, Tony.
He is, yeah. Wouldn't like to get on his bad side though. You
could say that about most people in boxing. In fairness, can you?
Yeah, apart from us. Anyway.
We're not intimidating people.
That's why we're sat here.
Fact.
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, let us know how you feel Canelo Ryder will end this weekend in Guadalajara, Mexico. Thanks very much, Andy Clark, for stopping behind today and getting some words in without Barry Jones. But from me, Rob Tebbert, from him, Andy Clark, thank you, as always, for stopping by at the ID Boxing Podcast, and we'll catch up with you soon.